Have you ever wondered about the mysteries behind the origins of humanity? Those profound questions about the first breaths of life, the hidden battles in the spiritual realm, or the enigma of the very first families described in Scripture? If so, you're not alone. And if you've ever been drawn to explore these questions deeply, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the Bible Stories channel, and leave a comment with 777, signaling your readiness to journey beyond familiar narratives and uncovered truths that have long been veiled. Our journey begins calmly, with a serene reflection on the foundational chapters of Genesis, where we read about Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel, the four individuals who, according to the Bible, populated the earliest earth. But soon, we enter a complex, deepening mystery. Cain commits the world's first murder and is banished to the land of Nod. There, he suddenly has a wife, an enigmatic figure who appears out of nowhere in the text, yet no source explicitly explains her origin. If Adam and Eve are truly the first humans, then who exactly was Cain's wife? This apparent paradox is not a trivial footnote, but a profound theological puzzle. It pierces the surface of traditional interpretations, challenging our understanding of creation and human genealogy. It whispers of stories erased, lineages forgotten, and truths suppressed not only in Scripture itself, but throughout the history of theological thought. The Bible tells us in Genesis that after Cain's exile, he knew his wife, and she conceived Enoch. Yet, in the timeline provided, no other humans seem to exist aside from Adam, Eve, Cain, and the recently deceased Abel. Genesis 5 later mentions that Adam had other sons and daughters, but this is after the birth of Seth, who replaces Abel, making the timeline for Cain's wife's existence difficult to reconcile strictly. For over 2 millennia, this mystery has been wrestled with quietly by scholars, theologians, and seekers of truth. Hidden within ancient Jewish texts and archaeological findings are clues to daughters of Adam and Eve, women whose names and stories were systematically omitted from the canonical biblical genealogies. These forgotten daughters fill the gaps, offering a fresh perspective on humanity's beginnings and suggesting the presence of a broader, early human community than traditionally acknowledged. As we delve into these layers, this story invites us to think not just about individuals, but civilizations. Cain is traditionally portrayed as a simple farmer and murderer, yet scriptures hint at something much greater: a city builder, a man with knowledge and leadership skills, and a founder of cultures. How could such a city emerge from only one family? This question beckons us even deeper into the profound complexities behind early human society. The ancient Near East echoes these narratives in its own myths and records, preserving memories of multiple human bloodlines, supernatural beings mingling with humanity, and advanced civilizations that challenge simplistic readings of Genesis. These rival traditions speak to the intricate tapestry of origins, spiritual promises, and curses that have shaped human existence in ways forgotten or deliberately obscured. This exploration is more than academic. It's a spiritual and intellectual quest that touches upon original sin, divine justice, salvation, and the very nature of what it means to be human. Is there more to our story than we have been told? What if understanding Cain's wife is key to unlocking these long-held secrets? If this intrigues you, please engage below. Your voice is vital in a generation seeking to uncover deeper biblical truths and spiritual realities. Together, let's begin this immersive journey into origins, and exploration that is calm in beginning but steadily draws us in, until we face profound reflections on identity, destiny, and divine purpose. Stay with us as we examine the biblical accounts, ancient traditions, archaeological evidence, and genetic research, each converging to reveal a hidden dimension of human history and theology waiting to be understood. Like and subscribe to continue this unfolding revelation and become part of a community that dares to seek the truth beneath the surface. Sweet dreams and profound discoveries lie ahead. Let's settle into this journey, allowing our minds and hearts to move slowly, thoughtfully, through the dense and fascinating thickets of ancient story, the story of Cain, his exile, and the impossible paradox that follows him like a shadow. After the blood of Abel fell and silence seized the land, Cain was cast into the unknown, the land of Nod, east of Eden. The air around him was thick with questions, none more resonant than the mystery of his wife. Genesis tells us that Cain settled, took a wife, and fathered Enoch. But from where did this woman come? The text seems almost to expect us not to notice, yet this missing link has disrupted the work of theologians, seekers, and skeptics alike for centuries. We must begin, then, by facing the tension head-on. If Adam and Eve were the only humans, the presence of Cain's wife cannot logically be explained unless, and this is vital, there are missing narrators, unexplored genealogies, and unspoken stories hidden between scripture's lines. The surface of Genesis is calm, but under that rippling words, ancient traditions bubble with alternative explanations. Dive beneath that surface, and the story expands. Early Jewish texts, manuscripts, largely omitted from standard canons, to offer names, identities, and family lines, systematically erased or minimized by later religious authorities. The Book of Jubilees, an influential source among the Essenes and other ancient sects, boldly claims that Adam and Eve had both sons and daughters in their earliest generations. These daughters, named and remembered in some traditions, became wives to their brothers, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity for the human story to continue. And there, in the space the main text leaves blank, the apocrypha fill in the gaps, suggesting not just one but many daughters, whose very existence challenges our understanding of the genealogical account. But why would these daughters be left out? The answer requires a gentle unraveling of both social and theological knots. In the patriarchal societies that produced and codified the Genesis text, names and lineages were almost exclusively male. Lineage, rights, and inheritance flowed through male names, and only rarely did a woman enter the list unless her role was directly required for a divine or royal story. Daughters were assumed but unnamed, their stories folded in silence. What we receive is not a full account, but the shadow of a much larger family tree. Pause and consider the mathematics. Genesis 5:24 informs us, almost matter-of-fact, that Adam had other sons and daughters over a 930-year lifespan. If Adam and Eve lived and bore children for centuries, their family might number in the dozens, even hundreds, within a few generations. Extended lives, high fertility, and the absence of disease in these imaginary first centuries could have produced a robust, rapidly multiplying population. Cain's wife, under this scenario, could have been a sister or even a niece, her place obscured by the male-centered concern of biblical genealogies. Her life essential but unnamed. Yet the puzzle deepens if we linger over Cain's fear. Genesis 4:14 records Cain's protest to God after being banished. "Whoever finds me will kill me." In the context of only 3 or 4 known humans, this fear is irrational, but not when you entertain the idea that several generations had already quietly slipped by, or that more people existed than the core family were shown. Ancient interpreters were astutely aware of this. Their traditions fill the land of Nod with pre-existing peoples, sometimes human, sometimes of another order, remnants of ancient regional creation myths, where many clans are shaped by divine or semi-divine hands. Take, for example, the Mesopotamian and Sumerian traditions, which describe whole generations of Earth's first peoples, creatures of clay, fashioned by gods. These ancient accounts present an early world teeming with life, culture, and conflict far beyond the garden's borders. Some rabbis and Christian fathers suggested, controversially, that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 refer to different acts of creation. Genesis 1 as the broad making of humankind, Genesis 2 focusing specifically on Adam's lineage. If so, Cain's wife may have been a descendant from a line of people fashioned outside the garden, with Adam and Eve's lineage chosen for a special relationship with Gadda, possibility discussed in pre-Adamic theories through the centuries. It is here the tension between doctrine and evidence grows sharpest. Orthodox theology has long defended the unity and direct descent of all humanity from Adam and Eve. This is not a mere doctrinal quirk, but a foundation of beliefs about original sin and salvation. If all humans descend from one pair, then inherited sin and the need for redemption passes to all equally. If, however, there were others, faith communities must revisit questions about election, inherited guilt, and the scope of divine promise. Still, some ancient Christian and Jewish interpreters were not afraid to address these complexities. Some spoke openly of Adam and Eve having as many as 70 children, sons and daughters, all who scattered and peopled the earth. Other voices, less orthodox and more speculative, imagined Cain's wife as a product of pre-Adamic creation, or even a symbolic figure standing for humanity's restless and exiled potential. To see the depth of this mystery, one might recall the psalmist's words, "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain." Psalm 139:6. The story of Cain and his wife, then, becomes not a problem to be solved, but an invitation, a call to reflect on the limitations of what we know, the selective memory of traditions, and the wondrous, sometimes troubling, breath of the divine purpose. As you contemplate these questions, remember, the story was never meant to give us easy answers. The gaps, the silent spaces, are themselves an echo of humanity's journey, our longing to know who we are, where we came from, and what stories have been lost in the telling. If this reflection stirs something deep within you, consider becoming part of our truth-seeking community. Like and subscribe for more explorations, and join the conversation with your questions and insights. Together, let us journey slowly and deeply, searching not only for factual certainties, but for the wisdom that lies in the asking. Let's draw a deep breath and step further into the web of the early Genesis story, giving ourselves the opportunity to slow down and observe, in minute detail, the tangled questions underlying the first family's narrative. This section meets you at the crossroads between scriptural record and the realities that countless generations have longed to uncover. Who else shared the earth with Cain, Adam, and Eve? What can we discover when we investigate what's missing or implied, rather than what is explicitly detailed? Genesis presents a timeline that, on its surface, feels simple. Adam and Eve were created, Cain and Abel were born. A brother's jealousy led to the world's first murder, and Cain was exiled to Nod. Yet there the story grows abruptly complex. Genesis 4:17 mentions that Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. No introduction for this mysterious wife is given, as though her presence is an assumption rather than an event requiring explanation. The ancient narrative here seems to cast a shadow, the unspoken, the invisible dot. To unravel this riddle, we need to peer into the heart of the matter with unwavering honesty. The tension and silence in the biblical record. The ancient chroniclers, often writing for patriarchal societies, focused their attention on the male descendants, and so genealogies were crafted almost exclusively around sons. The mention in Genesis 5:2 for that Adam had other sons and daughters arrives almost as an afterthought, yet that simple phrase holds astonishing significance. If Adam and Eve's lives spanned centuries, as claimed in the ancient world, then the invisible branches of the family tree must have been plentiful, filled with daughters who go unnamed and stories left unwritten. Let's consider, calmly now, the possible realities. If Adam lived for 930 years, and if Eve likewise had centuries of fertility, their household might have grown to dozens, perhaps even hundreds, in just a few generations. Each child, as generations progressed, would then begin new lineages of their own, dramatically increasing the population. Is it then possible, even likely, that Cain's mysterious wife was one of these unnamed daughters, a sister or niece, whose existence was considered self-evident by the ancient storytellers, who did not see the need to document every birth? This explanation certainly resolves some of the paradox, but it also opens a labyrinth of further questions, particularly when we consider Cain's fear after his banishment. "Whoever finds me will kill me," Genesis 4:14. If there were only three other people, Adam, Eve, and Cain himself, why would he voice such a concern? The passage suggests a world already quietly full, or at least more peopled than the text directly describes. In this moment, we touch something profound. The gaps aren't merely omissions, they are living spaces where silence becomes as meaningful as any word spoken. Ancient Jewish tradition does not shy from filling these silences. Sources like the Book of Jubilees articulate that Adam and Eve bore both sons and daughters, matched in pairs, and that Cain's wife was his sister, often named as Awen. The Talmud even details that Adam and Eve had as many as 63 children, if it had knowledge of these forgotten daughters was preserved, even cherished. In some traditions, these daughters were not regarded as secondary, but essential. Their marriages to their brothers, unthinkable by later moral standards, were seen as necessary for survival and continuation at humanity's dawn. But why would patriarchal scribes leave out these daughters by name? Here we find a quiet logic. Ancient societies traced heritage, inheritance, and authority through fathers and sons. Women's roles, though vital, were backgrounded, unless tied to a revelatory thread in salvation history. Society assumed their presence, but gave no voice to their stories, no record to their names. Reflect on the larger context at play. The ancient Near Eastern world did not exist in a vacuum. Mesopotamian and Sumerian traditions preserved stories of gods shaping whole generations and lineages distinct from the Genesis account. Some Jewish and Christian scholars even speculated that Genesis 1 describes the creation of humankind in general, while Genesis 2 focuses on Adam's line in particular. If so, the possibility of multiple parallel lineages emerges pre-Adamic, or otherwise suggesting that Cain's wife might have come from a people outside the garden's lineage, chosen or set apart for reasons beyond our understanding. Archaeological evidence quietly supports the theory of a largening human family. Excavations in ancient Mesopotamia, for instance, reveal societies far older than the traditional biblical timeline allows. Societies that were both highly organized and technologically advanced. Genetic research reveals population bottlenecks and founder events, implying that humanity descended from a small group that quickly diversified, not simply a single couple. These findings do not invalidate the Genesis story they make it more intricate, connecting science with myth in unexpected ways. The greater mystery, however, remains unresolved. Even as evidence points to an extended early family, the biblical narrative is marked by an intentional silencer hush that invites questions rather than shuns inquiry. Why? We must remember that stories are shaped as much by what they omit as by what they include. In the ancient world, where texts were sacred and wholly public, the choice to leave certain figures unnamed was a powerful form of curation. Philosophically, this mystery challenges us. Is the true purpose of the Genesis narrative to provide a literal, exhaustive genealogy, or to provoke contemplation of the spiritual dynamics at the foundation of all humanity? Perhaps the silence about the daughters of Adam and Eve is itself an invitation to consider the unseen, the marginal, the necessary, to breathe life into the forgotten, and to wrestle with the perplexities of origins, morality, and divine intent. Psalms 139-15 writes, "My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place." Just as the psalmist ponders the unseen, so too we lean into the mystery, finding that our spiritual journey is to seek understanding where words fade and silence governs. As we wander deeper into the ancient garden's shadow, let us honor both the revealed and the concealed, knowing that the story of creation endures not only in what we know, but in how we quest for meaning. If you find yourself moved by these unresolved riddles and the gentle absence at the center of the Genesis story, become part of our journey to uncover voices passed over the daughters, the exiled, the silent witnesses, whom the scriptural record silently led but never quite named. Like and subscribe if you dare to listen for what is missing, and to keep searching for a wisdom that grows richer with every step further into the unknown. Let's open our minds wider, slowing the pace, gently settling into a deep, analytical space, ready to examine the complex field of interpretations, scholarly theories, and the ripple effects of this ancient riddle. At the center stands Cain's wife, her identity casting long shadows and bright illuminations upon the story of human origins. The very question of who she was has fractured communities, challenged clerical authorities, and fueled debates in seminaries, lecture halls, and around family tables for centuries. The thread begins with the sister-wife theory, considered by many to be the most straightforward, yet ironically, the most controversial. This explanation posits that Cain's wife was indeed his sister, one of the unlisted daughters of Adam and Eve, Genesis 5-4. In its brief but weighty phrasing, alludes to Adam having other sons and daughters. Ancient traditions, including the Book of Jubilees, go further, naming Cain's wife Awan his twin. Rabbinic commentaries record that this practice of sibling marriage was seen as necessary for survival, not a moral failing in the world's first generation. Yet the discomfort with this answer is real and persistent. Modern readers, informed by laws in Leviticus and contemporary knowledge about genetics, find incestuous unions disturbing. The Bible itself later forbids such relationships. If the origin of humanity began in this way, does it mean God's ethical standards evolved? Some theologians have argued that, at creation's dawn, the human gene pool was so pure, so unsullied by the genetic mutations that accumulate over millennia, that close-kin marriages did not pose the dangers they later would. A rationale that attempts to harmonize biology morality, and scripture. But the sister wife theory does not answer all the riddles. Specifically, it strains to explain Cain's anxiety in Genesis 4:14. Whoever finds me will kill me. Why would Cain fear for his life if the world's population was limited to his immediate family? This single verse hints at a larger, perhaps more complex human community outside the narrative's minimal scope. Here emerges the pre-Adamic hypothesis, an idea both ancient and radical. This theory suggests Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 describe separate creative acts, the former a broad creation of humankind, and the latter a particular story, Adam and Eve, the first covenant people. According to this view, there were other humans upon the earth, people not descended from Adam and Eve, but created in the earlier generative act, described in Genesis 1:26-27. Supporters of the pre-Adamic theory note linguistic nuances of Adam, meaning both man and mankind, and point to world mythologies, Sumerian, Babylonian, and others, which similarly feature multiple origins for humanity. This hypothesis, though, collides with Christian doctrines about original sin and salvation. If not all humans derive from Adam and Eve, how universal is the effect of Adam's fall, and how inclusive is Christ's redemption? The debate is far from trivial. It strikes at the heart of soteriology and the meaning of being human in theological terms. Others have taken a still more imaginative path, invoking the enigmatic Nephilim of Genesis 6. Some propose that Cain's wife was descended from even related two beings who were not purely human, referred to as the sons of God or ancient giants. The Book of Enoch and other apocryphal sources imagine a world alive with supernatural entities, some benevolent, many not. If such unions truly occurred, they introduce horrifying and fascinating variables into humanity's genetic and spiritual inheritance, explaining both sudden leaps in technology and periods of gigantic, shadowy violence in early scriptures. Meanwhile, recent advances in genetics bring the story into the laboratory, challenging all prior certainties. Human DNA reveals patterns, known as founder effects, bottleneck events, and rapid expansions, aligning with the notion of small, interbreeding groups growing rapidly over generations. While the scientific consensus does not confirm the literal tale of Adam and Eve, it does suggest that ancient populations intermarried within tight communities, sometimes as few as a handful of clans, lending a modern echo to old arguments about sibling unions and closed genetic pools. Amid all these debates, it is important to recognize the silent power of omission in the biblical genealogies. The exclusion of daughters by name, the jumps in generational lists, and the quiet movement of unnamed women through the origin story are not oversights. They are choices made by scribal authorities, shaping what would become sacred canon. These decisions have not erased the evidence, but rather concealed it just enough to provoke the eternal questions we ask now. Pause for a moment and let the philosophical implications percolate. Is the value of this mystery in its resolution, or in its capacity to provoke relentless, reverent curiosity? Or, as the psalmist mused, such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. Perhaps the lesson embedded within the question of Cain's wife is that human understanding is always provisional, always growing. What we see as contradiction may actually be an invitation to humility, wonder, and communal searching. In the ancient world, as in ours, the stories we tell and the mysteries we leave unsolved shape the architecture of belief and identity. The genealogical riddles, the ethical puzzles, and the shadowy figures like Cain's wife do not weaken the biblical account. They make it more human, more honest, and more enduring. If these insights have unlocked new thoughts in your mind, consider joining this ongoing journey. Like and subscribe to stay connected. For further in we go, each step informed not only by archaeological and genetic discoveries, but also by the persistent questions alive in our hearts. Keep questioning, keep seeking, for the story is richer than any single answer could contain. Let us continue this immersive journey, taking another measured breath as we approach the pivotal moment of breakthrough, a revelation born not just of curiosity, but of diligent investigation and the courage to question what lies beneath the surface. At the midpoint of our exploration, the path becomes more participatory, inviting you not merely as a listener, but as an investigator and active participant to trace the evidence scattered across the ancient world, scripture, and your own capacity for critical insight. Pause slow your pace. Imagine yourself with a Bible in hand, turning to Genesis 4:15. There, God assures Cain, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." The Lord marks Cain, granting him protection. But from whom? Who else roamed the earth, ready to threaten Cain, unless the world brimmed with more people than the central Genesis account acknowledges? This pivotal question, which you can verify for yourself, is your first hint that the scriptural surface is merely one layer of a deeper reality. Now, compare the genealogies recorded in Genesis 4:17-24 and 5:1-32. Notice the parallel lineages, names like Enoch, Lamech, overlapping but reflecting different stories. Here, the textual structure itself quietly hints at multiple simultaneously developing family branches, not a single, isolated family in a world otherwise empty. Ancient Jewish tradition teaches that parallel genealogies preserve the bloodlines of Adam and Eve's daughters, their stories and unions implied rather than directly stated in the text. Your investigation deepens. Seek out the Book of Jubilees, chapter 4, as it draws back the veil, naming Cain's wife Awan and weaving a far more elaborate web of relationships than Genesis alone describes. The ancient text's detail fills the void, asserting the essential presence of daughters, sisters, wives each, carefully paired in the earliest generations. The contrast is stark. Where Genesis is spare, Jubilees is astonishingly precise. Which account feels more authentic, or, perhaps, more complete? Engage with language. The Hebrew word Adam serves in Genesis both as a proper name Adam himself and as a representation of humankind. In Genesis 1:27, Adam the human suggests a collective, while in Genesis 2-7, Adam functions more as a particular individual. Ancient readers, especially those fluent in the language's nuances, were aware that such distinctions could imply the existence of broader populations alongside the primordial pair, giving Cain perfectly plausible options for companionship beyond his immediate family. Now, turn outward from text to trowel. Search for archaeological evidence at locations like Göbekli Tepe, Katal Yuk, and Tel Esau, and ancient sites in the same regions long associated with Eden and the earliest biblical patriarchs. These sophisticated settlements, dating back to the very eras biblical chronologies assign to Adam's descendants, display complex architecture, organized religion, and social hierarchies, all requiring communities much larger than the tiny core family of Genesis. Ask, how did such societies arise if human history began with only a handful of individuals? Genetic evidence amplifies the mystery. Research into mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam points not to a single married couple, but to nodes in much larger, crisscrossing family trees, representing the most recent common ancestors for certain genetic markers, living at different times and in different places. This complexity aligns better with traditions that envision multiple partnering families and numerous early descendants, rather than an isolated pair launching all humanity. Consider how this opens new approaches for reconciling faith and science. Next, examine marriage practices in ancient Near Eastern societies. Among the earliest royalty and tribal leaders, sibling marriages and unions among close relatives were routine, seen as crucial for maintaining cohesive bloodlines and preventing the erosion of dynastic or spiritual identity. The records of Egyptian pharaohs, Sumerian kings, and early patriarchs reflect these practices as a social norm that echoes the relationships implied, yet unnamed, among Adam and Eve's descendants. Track every mention of women in Genesis 1-11. Create a simple tally: which women are named, and which wives, daughters, and mothers are silently assumed by the lineage, yet receive no introduction. The mathematics alone, combined with ancient patriarchal conventions, demonstrate how indispensable, yet omitted, these women were to the continuing story. Every unnamed wife or daughter is a reminder that the true structure of early humanity was far greater than the genealogical lists admit. Delve into the question of suppression. Why were so many of these stories excluded from the biblical canon? Early church councils set strict criteria for inclusion, often omitting texts not for unreliability, but for challenging doctrines or highlighting themes that threatened established authority. The Book of Jubilees, certain Gnostic Gospels, and apocryphal texts with more detailed lineages were often suppressed because their implications about women, bloodlines, or multiple populations were deemed too radical for orthodox teaching. Take on the challenge of researching traditions about the Watchers and Nephilim. These ancient Jewish legends, found in the Book of Enoch and fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls, describe supernatural beings interacting with humans, producing lineages and giants that puzzle interpreters. How might such myths reflect early memories of population mixing, social upheavals, or genetic diversity far richer than the Genesis summary implies? Scrutinize the science. Modern studies on human population, bottlenecks and founder effects show periods when our ancestors dwindled to small groups and then rapidly expanded, a process consistent with multiple family branches multiplying quickly, not a single, continuous line. The timing of these events, when compared with archaeological and textual timelines, offers surprising harmonies and striking contradictions, both demanding nuanced exploration. Now, interact with living debates among scholars. Seek out the writings of respected experts like Hugh Ross, Michael Heiser, William Dever, and Kenneth Kitchen. Read their original arguments, observe their disagreements, and see how even among the most learned, consensus remains elusive. The conversation is vibrant, often contentious, and always evolving, reminding us that biblical interpretation is a living, communal inquiry. Finally, synthesize the evidence. Create a timeline that overlays biblical chronologies, archaeological findings, and genetic data. Where do these lines intersect, and where do they diverge? What patterns become clear when you look at the full sweep of history, myth, biology, and social memory all at once? The resulting map is not a straight line, but a tapestry rich with intersections, silences, connections, and mysteries. Through this participatory approach, you are not only consuming a story, but also joining a centuries-old investigation. You become an inheritor of a tradition that values questioning, connecting, and constantly seeking deeper understanding. Each observation, every challenge and possibility you explore, brings you closer to the living heart of the Genesis mystery. If this journey has sparked a new level of engagement, consider reaffirming your connection, like and subscribe to support this community, and contribute your discoveries in the comments. Together, you and generations before and after you continue to shape the evolving story of human origins, biblical truth, and shared meaning. As we move forward, let us do so with humility, curiosity, and a quiet confidence that every question, bravely asked, deepens the wonder of the answers still to come. As we immerse ourselves more deeply, let us pause to absorb what has been uncovered and then press forward. For Section 6 marks the threshold of a genuine paradigm shift, a reconfiguration of what we thought we knew about biblical history, human origins, and ultimately, ourselves. Here, theory converges with evidence, and the implications radiate far beyond ancient narratives into every corner of our modern world. The genealogical revelations traced in ancient texts have rewritten the roots of our most revered biblical figures. According to traditions preserved outside the canonical scriptures, the line of Cain fused through a woman. His sister wife did not vanish with the flood, but survived, mixing with the descendants of Seth through the intermarriage with figures like Noah's wife, Naamah. Ancient Armenian and Georgian sources, as well as references in the book of Joshua, affirm that Naamah was the daughter of Lamech, a descendant of Cain, and sister to Tubal-Cain. This means that following the flood, the heritage of both Cain and Seth coursed through the veins of every new branch of humanity, their lines inseparably linked. This genealogical weave explains mysteries embedded in the lives of key biblical characters. King David, for instance, inherits attributes from both lines: his artistic and warrior prowess attributed to Cain's legacy, his spiritual depth to Seth's. The implications ripple out. Jesus Christ's human ancestry, through David, would likewise include not only the righteous lineage of Seth and Adam, but also the innovative legacy of Cain. This unification embodies the reunion of humanity's divided bloodlines, reconciling spiritual and creative fragmentation in the single arc of redemption. Why does this matter beyond theological curiosity? It challenges us to see biblical history not as a simple tale of good versus evil, but as a profound interplay of diverging and converging spiritual streams. The ancient texts suggest that these blended genealogies explain both the brilliance and the turbulence in the lives of biblical heroes: Abraham's daring, Moses' leadership and tempers, Solomon's wisdom and excess, all become logical when seen as inheriting both creative rebellion and divine Relationship. Archaeological data supports these ancient records. DNA findings from burial sites in the Middle East reveal markers of small founding populations that maintained group identities while intermarrying, matching the patterns predicted by these genealogies. Furthermore, the Essenes, the Jewish sect behind the Dead Sea Scrolls, preserved traditions that described humanity as divided between sons of light and sons of darkness, symbolic of Seth and Cain's dual inheritances. Their vision saw the end times as a final merging, a cosmic reconciliation between these streams. Gnostic Christian texts, long suppressed by institutional authorities, echo these themes. The Gospel of Philip and the Apocalypse of Adam portray Jesus as the one who reunites early humanity's estranged bloodlines, suggesting the fundamental mission of Christ was not merely to absolve sin, but to heal the very rupture in human spiritual DNA caused by those ancient choices. Modern genetic research further underscores this motif of integration. Studies in population genetics demonstrate that humanity descended from small founding clusters, with recurring events of separation, mixing, and reunion resonating with ancient genealogical models rather than simplistic interpretations. The convergence between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science suggests a more sophisticated view of human origins than was previously imaginable. What does it mean, then, to carry this dual inheritance? It reframes the ongoing struggle within. Every person is not simply moral, but metaphysical, a tug between the drive for creative achievement and the longing for spiritual relationship. The biblical narrative, refracted through this lens, tells a story where the ultimate goal is the harmonization of these forces. This profound reframing brings new relevance to personal and communal life. The intricate mix found in the biblical patriarch sound by extension in all humanity means that creativity, ambition, restlessness, and even periodic rebellion need not be banished as mere flaws, but appreciated as integral elements awaiting integration with divine purpose. Our calling is not just to choose sides, but to pursue balance. The journey of faith becomes less about suppressing certain traits and more about weaving them into their intended harmony, a spiritual and existential task echoing the ultimate reconciliation anticipated in Scripture. Thus, Section 6 calls upon every listener to recognize, perhaps for the first time, that the patterns of creativity and conflict, achievement and longing, are not random nor merely personal. They are deeply ancestral. Both the shadow and the light within us are echoes of that earliest division and the slow, redemptive process that follows. If these ideas spark both curiosity and a yearning for deeper belonging, you're sensing what generations before us have glimpsed but few dared to explore. Reflect on how your own gifts and struggles may be evidence of converging lines, and on seeking their union, you engage directly with the grand narrative of human restoration. Join this community by liking and subscribing as we continue to probe the intersections of genetics, theology, and human experience together, seeking not just knowledge, but wisdom and wholeness. Let us move mindfully into the next stage of this journey, letting the magnitude of the genealogical revelations settle before we carefully examine their far-reaching consequences on human civilization, technological progress, and the very fabric of cultural evolution. Here in Section 7, we witness the practical and transformative implications of humanity's dual spiritual inheritance, a union of creative innovation and divine relationship that has shaped societies, sciences, and the arts across epochs. We begin with a striking thought. What if the great leaps in civilization, those moments when humanity seemed to collectively leap forward, trace, in part, to the gradual healing of the ancient spiritual divide initiated by Awen's primordial choice? Embracing this paradigm, scientific revolutions, Renaissance awakenings, and industrial booms are not merely the outcomes of isolated genius or social circumstance, but the external unfolding of an ancient internal reunion. Consider how the scientific revolution redefined Western civilization. Figures like Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, and Galileo Galilei did not dismiss faith in their pursuit of empirical knowledge. Instead, their deep theological convictions fueled explorations, as they believed, quite literally, that uncovering the laws of nature was an act of honoring both the Creator and the creative spark embedded within themselves. Their diaries and treatises repeat an ancient logic. Only a humanity that embodies both divine relationship and innovative power can awaken and elevate creation itself. This balancing act remains evident today. In places where technological advancement accelerates but faith and communal values recede, societies often experience a corresponding rise in alienation, anxiety, and ethical confusion. The strengths of the Cain line, creativity, invention, drive, begin to outpace the anchor of Seth's spiritual orientation, creating innovation untethered from wisdom. Conversely, where spiritual traditions harden into insularity or retrenchment, stasis and decline often follow. Flourishing emerges most strongly from the dynamic integration of both legacies. Scan the great artistic epics, the cathedrals and sculptures of medieval Europe, the golden ages of Chinese, Indian, and Middle Eastern art and literature. Societies in these periods did not separate spiritual aspiration from creative genius. Artists, poets, and scientists alike understood their work as stewardship of a dual inheritance. The most enduring art is born from the integration of spiritual depth and imaginative innovation, a union echoing the ancient confluence begun by Cain and Abel's descendants. This principle resonates in the collective consciousness of entire cultures. For example, ancient Mesopotamians constructed ziggurats not only as feats of engineering, but as bridges between earth and heaven, merging knowledge with worship. In Egypt, the marriage of sibling pharaohs was believed to preserve a mystical union, necessary for both prosperity and divine favor. The mandate of heaven in Chinese philosophy underscored that only rulers who harmonized moral virtue, spiritual inheritance, with wise governance, practical innovation, could ensure the flourishing of the dynasty. The practical wisdom is profound. Innovation untethered from ethical orientation becomes dangerous. Spiritual depth without creative adaptation lapses into irrelevance. Both are needed for sustainable progress. This paradigm casts new light on the world's responses to modern crises. Take, for example, the response to technological change. When invention surges ahead of ethical reflection, common occurrence in fields like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, or media, societies face risks that neither ancient nor modern wisdom alone can answer. Here, the biblical narrative is not obsolete, but a map. True advancement requires the deliberate marriage of spirit and creativity. Environmental stewardship provides another revealing case. In eras and communities where technical expertise is integrated with reverence for creation, innovative solutions for climate challenges have been most sustainable and transformative. When human creativity is sanctified as divine partnership, then mere exploitation. Technology serves long-term flourishing instead of short-term gain. Education, too, is a test case for this ancient wisdom. Models that blend rigorous scientific or technical training with spiritual, ethical, and empathic development consistently outperform those that separate the mind from the heart, or innovation from integrity. The highest forms of human achievement, whether in science, the arts, or public life, rise from the harmony of these two orientations. Now consider the transformative power of the individual. If you, as part of this generation, find yourself pulled between creative ambition and the tug towards spiritual meaning, it is a sign not of conflict, but of calling. You are living evidence of a process that has shaped and will keep shaping civilization. The creative and innovative gifts you possess are not in competition with your spiritual values. They exist for union, awaiting the conscious work of integration that advances both soul and society. This realization empowers community building. When groups unite diverse strengths, merging inventors, artists, ethicists, and sages, they echo the genealogy with which this series began and model the wholeness for which the ancient story prepares us. Each community, workplace, and movement becomes a microcosm of humanity's journey toward integration. Philosophically, the most enduring cultures are those that never lost sight of their dual spiritual heritage. The societies that thrive are those which continually reintegrate creative innovation with spiritual wisdom, refusing to choose between progress and reverence, but seeking the synthesis of both. This is the quiet revolution now available to every individual, family, and nation. If you sense within yourself a renewed longing to see creativity, faith, and wisdom woven together, not only in your own life, but in your world, know that you are part of a lineage awakening to its purpose. This story asks not for perfection, but participation, to become, through your unique contribution, another agent of healing in the long story of humankind. If these insights move you, remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts so that others may join in reconciling the divided streams of human potential. Section 7 is not an ending but an invitation to embody, in concrete ways, the integration that history, tradition, and scripture have always anticipated. The journey continues, ever deeper, inviting us to imagine what our world might become when all its best inheritances are finally, fully, reunited. As we move gently into this pivotal moment of our journey, let us slow down and reflect on the astonishing web of implications that unravel, from the mystery of Cain's wife, implications that reach far beyond a single biblical detail, shaking the very foundations of how we understand human origins, sacred history, and our collective legacy. The paradox of Cain's wife is not just a textual curiosity. It is a profound riddle that reverberates through ancient traditions, archaeological findings, linguistic studies, and even the cutting edge of modern genetics. For centuries, this question has whispered beneath the surface of theology and scholarship. If Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel were the only people on earth, how could Cain have a wife? Why do the genealogies of Genesis skip over so many essential details? What's hidden, and why? Ancient Jewish texts, like the Book of Jubilees and detailed Talmudic commentary, refuse to ignore this enigma. They name Cain's wife, A1, and speak of a multitude of daughters born to Adam and Eve, women erased from Genesis, whose impact shaped all emerging civilizations. These sources fill in the silences left by scripture, offering a portrait of humanity's first generations far richer and more complex than most of us learned. Archaeological discoveries only deepen this mystery. Sites across the ancient Near East, from Göbekli Tepe to Katal Yuk, revealed societies much more advanced and populous than the world of Genesis 4 would suggest. These communities flourished during the very periods that the Bible associates with Adam's descendants, displaying evidence of advanced culture, architecture, and social organization signs that large human groups already inhabited the earth. Modern genetic research adds a new dimension. Studies show that all humans can trace their ancestry back to a small founding population, but not a single pair, a swiftly expanding cluster of related family lines. Just as ancient apocryphal sources described, there are founder defects and bottlenecks in our DNA records, aligning almost uncannily with the presence of multiple early lineages interwoven at humanity's beginning. This convergence of evidence is revolutionary. It means the question of Cain's wife is not merely about an absent name. It's about the intentional silence imposed on critical parts of humanity's story. The deliberate omission of daughters in Genesis genealogies, and the downplaying or outright suppression of complex early social realities, masked truths that were uncomfortable for later religious authorities. For tradition, it was simpler, less troubling, to imagine humanity sprouting from a pristine, isolated couple than to grapple with a messier, more interconnected reality. Why was this information suppressed? Because to admit the existence of forgotten daughters and parallel populations is to unsettle the structure of later doctrine, particularly ideas about original sin, election, and the exclusivity of biblical revelation. If there were other people, other families, other civilizations coexisting with Adam's household, what does it mean for inherited sin, for the idea of a chosen people, for the notion of the Bible as a complete, unbroken historical account? These are questions that shake the core of doctrine and challenge us to a richer, more nuanced engagement with faith. Various theories sought to resolve the contradiction. The most traditional Cain's wife as his own sister is supported by ancient texts but remains ethically troublesome, especially when weighed against later biblical prohibitions against incest. Then there's the pre-Adamite hypothesis, proposing that God created other humans besides Adam and Eve, indicated by Genesis's plural language and the sudden appearance of skilled, ancient societies. Some have even drawn connections to the Nephilim stories, mysterious offspring resulting from unions between sons of God and daughters of men, as early evidence of mixed lineages and spiritual complexity. These aren't just scholarly puzzles, they reshape how we read the very beginnings of the Bible. Cain's story emerges not as an isolated tragedy, but as the epicenter of the world's first spiritual and social schisms, creator and innovator, outcast and builder, and his wife stands as the forgotten matriarch, a symbol of erasure, but also a keeper of hidden knowledge, whose lineage carries both the burden of exile and the gifts of civilization. Archaeology linguistics, DNA, and forbidden texts all point to a shared truth. The silence around Cain's wife is strategic, not accidental. It was maintained to protect later theological narratives, to streamline complexity into simple doctrine, to consolidate spiritual authority. The ripple effect of this suppression can be felt to this day. It influences how churches teach scripture, how believers imagine their spiritual ancestry, and even how entire societies view the role of women, diversity, and outsiders in sacred history. But as these hidden stories resurface, the tapestry of Genesis glows with newfound richness, and challenged every time an unnamed wife is mentioned, every time an ancestral story jumps without explanation. The text is signaling the presence of erasure of women, of parallel peoples, of spiritual lines that were essential to the birth of humanity, yet for centuries lost in the footnotes or confined to esoteric library shelves. This is an invitation, not to skepticism, but to courageous exploration, to read with openness, to question with humility, and to seek the wisdom embedded within forgotten stories. It's a call to rediscover biblical history as a living, breathing process, not a fixed map, but an unfolding journey toward deeper truth. If this resonates, take part in this search for the genuine story. Like and subscribe to Bible Stories, and comment on what surprises you most about these revelations. As seekers in the modern age, you inherit both the questions and the courage of those ancient scholars who refused to be silenced, who believed that the fullness of truth could never be contained by dogma alone. The next step on this journey will take us even deeper, exploring how this rediscovered heritage doesn't just answer an old riddle, but fundamentally transforms our understanding of ourselves, our faith, and the world we are building together. Let us quiet our minds and let the implications of reunited spiritual genetics ripple through some of humanity's greatest contemporary challenges. As we dwell in this profound moment, the relevance of ancient wisdom becomes ever more apparent, particularly as we confront the astonishing complexity of modern life, artificial intelligence pushing the boundaries of consciousness, genetic engineering rewriting the rules of existence, and climate change demanding a new relationship between creator and creation. Through this lens, the story of Owan, not just as Cain's wife, but as the living bridge between innovation and intimacy, rebellion and relationship, takes on urgent, transformative power. Artificial intelligence stands at the frontier of the human quest for transcendence. This trail is blazed with both the ingenuity celebrated in Cain's legacy and the longing for meaning that vibrates through Seth's. In the rush of algorithms and machine learning, we see the Cain inheritance. In raw display, relentless creativity, drive toward mastery, and hunger for new possibilities. Yet, as ancient wisdom cautions, innovation without spiritual grounding risks wandering into deserts of unintended consequence. When progress outpaces reverence, technology can become an idoler, false answer to questions it cannot ultimately satisfy. It is here we must remember, true advancement emerges from the harmony of both legacies. AI, when created and governed with wisdom, transparency, humility, and purpose, becomes not a threat to human dignity, but a vessel for expressing the fullness of our spiritual inheritance. Teams and organizations that intentionally integrate ethical reflection with their technical breakthroughs are quietly manifesting the sacred reunion that A1 and Seth's line first set in motion. Genetic engineering offers another piercing example of this ancient tension: the power to shape life, to edit, correct, or enhance the genome. Echoes the mythic aspiration that first drove humanity east of Eden. But technologies reach into our deepest code must be matched by humility, a willingness to ask, not just can we, but also should we, and to what end. Here, the ancient story is not a cautionary relic, but a lamp, illuminating the necessity for integrative wisdom that honors complexity, heritage, and future generations. Global environmental crises, particularly climate change, cry out for the world to reunite innovation with an ethic of care. Ancient societies thrived when they sought balance, harnessing ingenuity to cultivate, sustain, and reverence the land and all living things. Today's environmental visionaries, those who create renewable technologies from a place of respect for creation, are, in effect, modern children of both Cain and Seth, advancing civilization by weaving together technical skill and spiritual stewardship. The economic and social fabrics of our era further reveal this pattern. Cultures and businesses that fuse cutting-edge business logic with authentic concerns for well-being, justice, and sustainability consistently outperform models fixated solely on profit or tradition. Over and again, success emerges not from dominance of one inheritance over the other, but from their deliberate, sometimes fragile, reunification. Education provides a living metaphor for this reunion. The most innovative schools, programs, and teaching philosophies invariably blend rigorous cognitive training with cultivation of character, empathy, and spiritual insight. Young people empowered to integrate these dual modes of knowing, one rooted in technical mastery, the other in reflective wisdom, are uniquely equipped to create communities, solve problems, and cultivate environments in which both creativity and care are honored. Healthcare, too, flourishes when practitioners refuse to divide mind, body, and spirit. Integrative medicine, bringing advanced science together with holistic care, echoes the ancient biblical mandate for wholeness. The healing that stands the test of time is always that which mends the deepest fractures, bridging the split between innovation and compassion, between striving and surrender. But perhaps most powerfully, our experience of social media, communication, and even art shows us this truth in microcosm. Social platforms that foster genuine community, understanding, and meaning, as opposed to those designed purely for engagement or profit experientially, demonstrate the fruits of reunited spiritual genetics. Art that transcends mere novelty or nostalgia, that instead marries technical brilliance with spiritual depth, transforms lives and shapes the soul of societies. The modern quest for fulfillment, personal, social, and cosmic, is not a call to choose between progress and piety, technology and tradition. It is an urgent invitation, echoing from Eden and Nod alike, to consciously cultivate the integration of all that we are meant to become. Failure to accept and nurture this reunion, the evidence suggests, leads not only to societal dead ends, but to the impoverishment of the human spirit and loss of the creative power gifted to us at our very beginning. Let the psalmist's reverent plea awaken in us. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. As we stand at the edge of the future, may we learn from Awan and the legacies she set in motion, not to divide our inheritance, but to claim and unite it, for only then do we become, in the fullest sense, the creators and caretakers of a world that is both new and ancient, innovative and holy. As we reach the final section of this profound journey, let us begin in stillness and reflection, inviting both calm contemplation and an awakening of the deepest truths hidden beneath familiar stories. The enigma of Cain's wife, long relegated to a footnote or dismissed as impossible, emerges now in its full glory as the key not only to understanding early humanity, but to unlocking a paradigm-shifting vision of our own identity, purpose, and destiny. Cain's wife, known in ancient Jewish tradition as Awan, was far more than just a spouse. She was humanity's first decision-maker, the woman whose choice to join Cain in exile rather than remain in Eden's spiritual safety marked the birth of a dual spiritual inheritance that flows through every human being. This choice created the fundamental tension that has driven human history ever since, between creative innovation and spiritual relationship, earthly ambition and divine connection, restlessness and reconciliation. This tension is not external alone, but lives deeply within us all. Every person carries the intertwined legacies of Cain and Sethov, Awan's bold rebellion, and Adam's covenant relationship. The ancient texts revealed this dual inheritance as both a blessing and a trial, offering immense creative power while demanding the challenge to integrate and balance it with spiritual wisdom. Consider the spiritual DNA you carry when you feel torn between striving for achievement and yearning for deeper meaning. When you wrestle to harmonize innovation with integrity, independence with intimacy, rebellion with reverence, you are living the echo of Awan's choice. This internal conflict is more than personal struggle. It is the ongoing unfolding of a cosmic process begun at humanity's dawn. Yet here rests the revolutionary truth. Awan's choice was not a tragic error, but a necessary step in the divine plan. Human history demanded this division so that full integration might one day be achieved. Separation was the painful prelude to reunion. Without Awan's decision to follow Cain, the eventual harmony that Jesus Christ embodies through the incarnation, the full integration of humanity's divided spiritual inheritances would not be possible. Jesus came not only as a savior from sin, but as the embodiment of the reunited spiritual genetics, the human who perfectly balanced both streams within himself, the creative, restless spirit, and the faithful, relational heart. His life, death, and resurrection accomplish what millennia of human history struggled to achieve: a restoration of original wholeness. In light of this, every spiritual rebirth, every moment of conversion and renewal's cosmic in scope. You are not merely saved as an individual soul, but invited into an ancient, enduring mission to participate in healing and reuniting human spiritual DNA across generations and populations, advancing the divine plan of restoration for humanity as a whole. This realization transforms our understanding of sin, salvation, and spiritual warfare. Sin ceases to be merely disobedience. It becomes the fracturing of unity within human nature. Salvation is no longer only legal pardon, but the progressive reconciliation of these once divided spiritual streams. Warfare is no longer only external battle, but the internal struggle to integrate and harmonize opposing forces within ourselves. The implications extend far beyond theology into how we live every day. They call for a renewed vision of Christian mission, one that embraces science and technology as vital expressions of divinely gifted creativity, while never losing sight of the essential spiritual grounding that gives such innovation meaning and morality. They urge the Church to become a healing community where innovation and holiness do not conflict but coalesce, where earthly achievements serve divine purposes. Ancient patterns of suppression remind us why this truth often remains hidden. For centuries, religious authorities feared the disruptive power of this knowledge, how it could challenge simplistic moral categories, upset institutional hierarchies, and demand a more complex understanding of human nature and divine grace. Yet today, these truths are re-emerging, beckoning a generation ready to embrace complexity and seek wholeness. Now more than ever, as humanity faces unparalleled technological leaps and ecological crises, the call is clear: to unite the gifts of our fragmented heritage into a new era of flourishing. The path forward is not to reject either creativity or spirituality, but to reconcile them, weaving together the boldness of Cain's bloodline with the faithfulness of Seth's. Join this movement by embracing both aspects of your spiritual inheritance. Acknowledge the restlessness and creativity within you as gifts to be guided, not denied. Let your faith become the anchor that holds innovation accountable to higher purposes. If this deep truth resonates with you, show your commitment by liking this video, subscribing to the Bible Stories channel, and commenting 777 to affirm that you seek not only answers but wisdom, not only stories but transformation. Together, we step beyond the surface, beyond convention, into a fuller understanding of what it means to be human, divinely complex, beautifully conflicted, ultimately united. Let your journey continue. The story of Cain's wife is not an end, but a beginning and invitation to discover your spiritual identity and participate in the cosmic drama of reconciliation. As we part, reflect on the words of Ecclesiastes 3:1, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. Now is the time to awaken, to reconcile, and to become whole." Sweet dreams and profound peace be with you as you carry forward this hidden wisdom into the unfolding chapters of your life and our shared human story.